The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted by Newell Fisher, Ruths and Leea Mäkelä. It is recorded and edited by Newell Fisher and is narrated by Newell Fisher and artificial intelligence. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 118. Well, we did it, for the third time. We went through the whole of Richard Adams' 1996 book, Tales from Watership Down, taking just over 5 months. So what is this episode about? Well, first we're going to take some time to look back over Tales from Watership Down, and then we're going to look forward to where we go from here. It will be an interesting transition in this podcast, but that word interesting can have all kinds of connotations. I'll explain more later. This will be the first of 4 episodes on other aspects of Watership Down before we start on the TV series. I'm not going to get your hopes up, but I think you're going to find these transition episodes very interesting. Meanwhile, please remember our appeal to raise funds for the Rabbit Welfare Association and Fund, which is ongoing. The link will be in the notes. Please give what you can. So then, let's hand over for the next section to our guest narrator.
Using AI art. This is your AI narrator. Don't worry, I won't become a regular feature. Newell Fisher has written the following, quote, "When I was going through the original novel of Watership Down, I started creating images for each episode when I was some way into the book and started putting the episodes on YouTube. This was time-consuming, but at the time I had the time. Obviously, when I went through the 1978 film, I was able to just use still images from that film, but then I got to Tales from Watership Down. I had to decide what I was going to do in order to create each episode image. Realizing that I could no longer spare the time to create them from scratch, I made the decision to use an AI program. During the course of going through Tales, AI has become a much bigger issue in the news, which is why I feel the need to address this. The simple fact is that I cannot afford to pay an artist to create such images, so, as this podcast makes me no money at all, I decided I was comfortable with having AI create the art for me. Though I have done some image mixing for a couple of episodes, namely episodes 105 The Great Marsh and 109 The Secret River, and AI did not provide the results I wanted for episodes 104 The Comical Field and 106 The Terrible Haymaking, so those images were made by me using picture editing. Ironically, using AI could be quite a laborious process at times. I wish I had kept more of the images I rejected. Some of them are hilarious. For some reason AI had a real problem with rabbit ears, and often an otherwise perfectly good image would be ruined by an extra ear. Yes, I could have photoshopped these out, but I decided not to take the time doing this. One of the stranger images was used for the first chapter, The Sense of Smell, as the image of that creature in the twilight with ears halfway down its back seemed to suit the chapter very well. Another was used for Speedwell's story, where I think the only prompt I entered was Crazy Rabbit. My favorite image was that of Fly Earth, used in episode 111, though last week's image of Campion is a close second. I'm opening with this subject because AI has become a real issue during the course of this year, and I didn't want my use of it to be another Lendry in the honeycomb. Obviously, going forward I will not need to use AI when dealing with a TV series, and I have decided to avoid using it whenever I can in future. I have also avoided tagging the images on Instagram with the hashtag #WatershipDownArt. At least I think I have. If you find an example where I haven't, please let me know. AI is a fascinating tool, and has allowed me to use images for this podcast, not least the logo image used from episode 100, that I could never have dreamed of when I started the podcast. But I wanted to make it clear that I am aware of the wider implications. End quote.
Looking back over Tales from Watership Down. So, we've finished going through Tales from Watership Down. As I said when we started, it is perhaps not right to call it a sequel to Watership Down. At times it begins to read like one, but that was only really in its third section. And I must admit it left me wanting a lot more of section 3. As I said at the start, when I first bought the book I was very tempted to jump ahead to that section, and personally I still find it by far the most interesting. The quarter of a century gap between the two books also means inevitably that they do not read in quite the same way. For example, Bigwig, as others have pointed out, is perhaps a little too bad-tempered in tales, when you bear in mind what he has just been through at the end of Watership Down. But then again, could he be suffering from PTSD? John Ruths has sent the following comments on the book. Quote, I think that adding to a novel with a set of stories versus another novel is an unusual move. Stephen King has written some prequel short stories. J.R.R. Tolkien had his appendices that followed Lord of the Rings, but a lot of this actually contained more past information and future. What Adams did was unusual, I'd say, but I still feel good that he did it. I'm sure that none of his other fiction works were followed by a set of short stories. The addition of characters was pretty fascinating, and these add to what we initially got in Watership Down, and in some cases he simply added some depth. We know much more about Heisensley and Vilthuril as a result of Tales. Adams also goes places you'd never guess he'd go. We learn much more about Speedwell, but in a story that is a total farce. I think that's pretty neat. My favourite stories in this novel are direct continuations from Watership Down, and among these, the Rabbit's Ghost story is the best one. I don't adhere to the idea of canon, I guess because of a part of Watership Down where Heisensley is telling a story that is a bit both changed and truncated. It might be because she's telling it to very young rabbits, or it might be because it's normal for rabbits, like people, to have a natural tendency to exaggerate things or to change them in an adaptive way. Given this, it's all canon to me, but I totally get why you question this, and I enjoy listening to your Is It Canon discussions. End quote. Thank you, John. As I always say, the idea of canon, as I use it, is deliberately subjective and intended to provoke discussion rather than settle it, and I hope that is entertaining to those listening. Looking forward to the TV series, Leea Mäkelä has sent the following intriguing thought. Quote, I finally caught up with episodes from the time I've had a pause in listening. I came to think only now that the fantastic underground river through stalactite caves connecting different warrens in the 1999 TV series seems to be the series maker's interpretation of the secret river. They turned it into a physical place instead of an abstract concept. Now, after close reading Tales, it will be interesting to take another look at this into the series and see how much stuff comes more or less straight from Tales. End quote. Indeed it will, Leah. And now, having gone through Tales in detail, I'll be looking out for any examples as I watch the TV series again. So then, let's look forward to what comes next. Looking forward to the TV series. This is a moment in this podcast's history that I've been regarding with some trepidation, if I'm completely honest. When we finished going through the 1972 novel, I knew there was a chance I would lose some originalist listeners who regarded that as the only authentic version of Watership Down. Then, when we finished going through the 1978 film, I knew I might lose some listeners who loved that film, but who had little interest in Tales from Watership Down. And now we've finished Tales. Next in the chronology of Watership Down is the television series that was made between 1999 and 2001. We've finished all of Richard Adams' writings on the subject. We've also finished the only film version we know he approved of. Richard Adams did not approve of the TV series that was aimed at children and was produced by Martin Rosen, who still held the rights to Watership Down after making the 1978 film. In fact, I have it on good authority that he regarded the series as actionable. In other words, he would probably have liked to have taken legal action in order to prevent it being made. I'm really selling this, aren't I? So, why am I going to take so much time going through it? There are 39 episodes of this series, and I plan to do an episode of this podcast on each one. And yes, I've seen them all, more than once. Could I be accused of suffering from some kind of Lapine-Stockholm syndrome? In other words, as this is the only Watership Down related material there is now in the chronology, am I feeling somehow compelled to take it seriously? Might it be better to just admit that the podcast has reached a logical end point to its weekly output? I've thought about this long and hard. In fact, I've known this moment was coming ever since I realised that this podcast was going to keep going after I started it. That's 2 years to think this through and to prepare the ground if I did not intend to carry on. And I am going to carry on. Here's why. This TV series, as I've learned over the last 2 years, has many fans. It would be tempting to think that this is just because people in their 20s remember it from their childhood. While it is true that the age profile of those who admire it seems lower than that for fans of the original novel, I really don't think this is the whole story. While there is a lot in this series that is, frankly, silly, and we must bear in mind that it was initially targeted at children, there is also a lot that is not. This series, whether we like it or not, constitutes the largest expansion of storytelling based around the world of Watership Down that Richard Adams established. And it is this storytelling, rather than the visual style of the series, that I intend to focus upon. I will, of course, refer a lot to the visual portrayal of characters and landscape, etc., but this is not going to be my primary focus. It is also important to add that this series contains the only portrayals of parts of the original novel on film, as it should do. To be frank, they had the time. Another fascinating element of this series is the way it treated the 1978 film as having established conventions that it felt the need to follow. In fact, this phenomenon was a large part of my reason for treating the 1978 film as canon. As a small example, Woundwort having one bad eye came from the film, not the book, in which there is no reference to any damage to one of his eyes at all. And there are many other examples of this establishment of conventions by the 1978 film. In its turn, this TV series, I think, influenced the Netflix series in 2018. Watch this space, because this progression of conventions in the development of the Watership Down narrative is an interesting subject in itself, however far you may think it has strayed from the original material, or should have strayed for that matter. And this is all a justified part of the deep dive into Watership Down that this podcast has been described as taking. Of course, you could just say that the reason this series followed the conventions of the 1978 film was because Martin Rosen produced both the film and the series. But there are enough differences between the two to make this a weak argument in my view. So, in about a month's time we will start going through this series in detail. There will be high points and there will be low points. Where I think the series has committed a crime against Watership Down, remember those, I will say so. On the other hand, where I think it has an element that should be regarded as canon, I will also say so. Though I will be a lot more sparing with these than when I went through Tales from Watership Down. The series will have to really earn them, but trust me, it will. And even where it cannot in any way be regarded as canon, credit will be given where it is due. For example, although the series' initial retelling of the story of the 1972 novel is less than impressive, its later huge expansion of Captain Campion's redemption arc is well worth looking at in detail. And then there is the soundtrack, which is very good, having been composed by Mike Batt, who also wrote Bright Eyes. I recommend listening to Thank You Stars, sung by Cerys Matthews, if you need further persuasion. I felt it necessary to say all the above, as this, as I said, could be an awkward moment in retaining the listenership of this podcast. I know fans of the TV series will be listening, at least I hope you will, but I really, really want to take everyone else with me on this journey as well. I hope I have persuaded you. What I will not do from this point forward is ever apologise for taking this series so seriously. It has, for better or for worse, earned its place in the Watership Down chronology. And I say that as someone who, yes, when I first watched it, had to pick my jaw up off the floor at first, but who came to enjoy it for what it is. I have watched the entire series more than once, and I am looking forward to making these episodes. I sincerely hope you will join me. Next time, having reached the end of Tales, another episode on a Watership Down related topic in the second of 4 episodes before we begin going through the 1999 to 2001 TV series.